November 29th, 1943, 11:47 a.m. 20,000 feet above Bremen, Germany. A 20mm cannon shell tears through the fuselage of B-17F. Rikki-tikki-tavi. The explosion rips the aircraft in half. Metal screams. Fire erupts. 8 men die in seconds. And 19-year-old Staff Sergeant Eugene Moran watches the nose of his bomber disappear in a ball of flames, while German fighters circle like sharks smelling blood. His parachute is shredded. Bullet holes riddle the silk. The harness straps are torn to pieces. He has no way out. Then the tail section breaks free from the burning wreckage, and Eugene Moran begins falling. 4 miles straight down. Inside a severed chunk of aluminum, with nothing but his twin .50 caliber machine guns and the absolute refusal to die. What happens next will defy every law of physics, every medical prediction, and every statistical probability of survival. This Wisconsin farm boy will not only survive a 4-mile fall without a parachute, he will spend the entire descent shooting back at the German fighters trying to finish him off. If you want to know how a teenager from a small town became one of the most impossible survivors in military aviation history, keep watching. Because this story is about to get insane. Let me take you back to the autumn of 1943. The Allied bombing campaign over Germany was in crisis. The 8th Air Force was bleeding. Every mission over the Reich was a death sentence wrapped in a flight plan. American B-17 flying fortresses were falling from the sky at catastrophic rates. In October 1943, alone, the 8th Air Force lost 214 bombers. That is 2,140 young American men killed, captured, or missing in a single month. Bremen was the worst. The industrial city in northwestern Germany had become a graveyard for American aircrews. German anti-aircraft batteries surrounding Bremen had destroyed 64 bombers in November alone. The flak was so thick, pilots described it as a black carpet hanging in the sky. You could walk on it, they said, if you were crazy enough to try. The 96th Bomb Group had lost 11 tail gunners since September. 11 men. Gone. The tail position was the loneliest job in the entire bomber. You sat alone at the back of the aircraft, separated from your crewmates by a narrow crawl space that nobody could navigate during combat. If something went wrong back there, you faced it alone. You lived alone. And most of the time, you died alone. The statistics were brutal. A B-17 crew member had a 1 in 4 chance of completing his 25-mission tour. 3 out of 4 would be killed, wounded, or captured before they finished. The average tail gunner lasted 7 missions, 7 flights into hell before the odds caught up with them. The generals in England knew the numbers. They saw the casualty reports stacking up on their desks every morning. They watched the empty bunks multiply across every airbase in East Anglia. But they had no choice. The bombing had to continue. Germany's industrial capacity had to be destroyed. The war had to be won. So every morning, young men climbed into their bombers, knowing the mathematics of death were working against them. They flew anyway, because someone had to. And on November 29, 1943, one of those young men was about to become a legend. Eugene Paul Moran was nobody special. At least that is what everyone who knew him would have said. He was a farm boy from Soldiers Grove, Wisconsin. Population 592. A tiny community in the southwestern corner of the state where people raised cattle, grew corn, and minded their own business. Eugene had spent his childhood doing the same things every farm kid did. Waking before dawn, feeding livestock, repairing fences, working until his hands bled and his back ached. He was 19 years old when he enlisted in the Army Air Forces in October 1942. 19. Still a teenager. Still young enough to believe he was invincible. Still naive enough to think war was an adventure waiting to happen. The Army trained him as an aerial gunner. They taught him how to operate the twin .50 caliber Browning machine guns that defended the B-17 from enemy fighters. They taught him how to track targets moving at 400 miles per hour. They taught him how to lead his shots, how to conserve ammunition, how to clear a jam in sub-zero temperatures while wearing gloves thick enough to stop frostbite. What they did not teach him was how to survive when everything went wrong. Nobody could teach that. Either you figured it out in the moment, or you died. Eugene arrived at RAF Snetterton Heath in England in September 1943. He was assigned to the 96th Bomb Group, 339th Bomb Squadron. His crew flew a B-17F named Rikki Tikki Tavi. 10 men: pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, flight engineer, radio operator, 2 waist gunners, ball turret gunner, and tail gunner. Eugene was the tail gunner, the loneliest position on the aircraft. His first 4 missions went smoothly, relatively speaking. They took flak, they saw fighters, they watched other bombers go down in flames. But Rikki Tikki Tavi always made it home. Eugene began to think maybe he would be one of the lucky ones. Maybe he would beat the odds. Mission number 5 would teach him otherwise. The morning of November 29, 1943, started like every other mission. Briefing at 0400 hours. Target Bremen's industrial facilities. Weather clear over the target. Expected opposition heavy flak. Moderate fighter activity. Takeoff 0730 hours. 346 B-17. Flying fortresses lifted off from bases across England that morning. They formed up over the North Sea, assembling into the massive combat box formations that were supposed to provide mutual protection. Supposed to. In reality, the formations just gave the German fighters more targets to choose from. Eugene crawled into his tail position as Rikki Tikki Tavi climbed to altitude. 23,000 feet. Minus 40 degrees outside. The cold seeped through his flight suit, through his heated underwear, through his bones. He checked his guns. Loaded. Functioning. Ready. The formation crossed the German coast, and that is when everything went wrong. German fighters hit them first. Messerschmitt Bf-109S, diving from above, their 20mm cannons blazing. Eugene tracked a fighter closing from 6 o'clock and squeezed his triggers. The guns hammered. Spent brass casings clattered around his boots. The Messerschmitt rolled away, trailing smoke. Then the flak started. Black bursts exploded across the formation. Each burst sent shrapnel fragments traveling at 3,000 feet per second. Eugene felt the impacts shaking the aircraft. The intercom went dead. He was cut off from his crew. Alone. Through his window, Eugene watched Rikki Tikki Tavi slide backward from the formation. They were losing speed, losing altitude. The wounded bomber was falling behind, and falling behind meant death. German fighters swarmed. More cannon rounds hammered the fuselage. Eugene returned fire, but the fighters came from every angle. There were too many, too fast, too deadly. A massive explosion shook the aircraft. Eugene looked forward and saw the nose section disappear in flames. The bombardier, the navigator, the pilot, the co-pilot, the flight engineer, gone. 5 men dead in an instant. 3 more crewmen in the waist section died when another shell tore through the radio compartment. Only Eugene and the navigator were still alive. The navigator bailed out immediately, his parachute blossoming white against the gray German sky. Eugene grabbed his own parachute, and his heart stopped. The silk canopy was shredded, bullet holes everywhere. The harness straps were torn. This parachute would not open. It was useless. He had no way out. For most men, this would be the moment of despair. The moment when hope dies and acceptance begins. But Eugene Moran was not most men. Before he could process his situation, the final blow came. A direct flak strike severed the tail section completely. The explosion was deafening. The entire tail assembly broke free from what remained of the fuselage. Eugene felt the sudden lurch as gravity took over. He was falling. Still inside the tail section. 20,000 feet above Germany. No parachute. No hope. No chance. Except Eugene Moran refused to accept that. The tail section did not drop straight down. The vertical stabilizer measured 13 feet tall. The horizontal stabilizers spanned 43 feet. Together, they created enough surface area to generate lift. The tail was not just falling, it was gliding, spinning slowly, descending at roughly 70 miles per hour instead of terminal velocity. Eugene gripped his gun handles. Through his window, he saw German fighters circling. They assumed everyone was dead. Why would they not? The bomber was destroyed. The tail section was falling. No one could possibly survive this. They were wrong. Eugene aimed at a Messerschmitt that swooped past. He fired. Tracers arced across the sky. The German pilot banked away, visibly startled. The severed tail section was shooting back. The dead gunner was not dead. Eugene kept firing. The tail section continued its strange descent, spinning slowly, falling through the cold German sky. German fighters kept their distance now. They had never seen anything like this. A piece of wreckage fighting back. A dead man refusing to die. On the ground, German anti-aircraft crews saw the tail section falling. They opened fire. Eugene was now being shot at from above by fighters and from below by flak batteries, while falling inside a severed tail section, without a parachute. The altimeter still worked. 19,000 feet. 18,000. The ground rushed closer. Eugene's head slammed against his gun sight. Blood ran into his eyes. His ribs cracked against the gun mounts, but he did not let go. 16,000 feet. 15,000. Trees below, fields, towns. 14,000. 13,000. The spinning pressed him against the bulkhead. The G-forces were crushing. Gold fillings in his molars popped out from the pressure. 12,000 feet. He tried the escape hatch. It would not budge. The frame had warped from the explosion. He was locked inside. 10,000 feet. 9,000. The trees were close now. 8,000. 7,000. The forest below rushed up to meet him. 6,000. 5,000. 4,000. Eugene could see individual pine trees now. Their branches reached upward like dark fingers. 3,000 feet. 2,000. 1,000. The impact came without warning. The tail section smashed into the tops of the pine trees outside the town of Syke, 12 miles south of Bremen. Branches snapped. Wood exploded. The vertical stabilizer caught on a thick trunk, and the entire section pivoted, slowing. More branches broke. The tail cartwheeled through the canopy, shedding pieces of aluminum. Then it hit the ground. The impact drove Eugene's head into his gun sight. His skull cracked. Blood poured from his scalp. His ribs broke completely. Both forearms snapped against the gun mounts. But he was alive. Eugene Moran had just fallen 4 miles inside a severed tail section and survived. He had done something that defied every law of physics, every medical expectation, every statistical probability. But his nightmare was only beginning. He was lying in a German forest with a crushed skull broken, arms, broken ribs, and internal bleeding. Enemy territory. No rescue coming. No hope of escape. German soldiers would arrive within minutes, and what came next would test Eugene Moran in ways that falling 4 miles never could. 17 months of captivity. Interrogation. Starvation. A death march through a German winter that would kill hundreds of his fellow prisoners. In Part 2, we will see how this broken, bleeding farm boy survived German captivity and walked 600 miles through the worst winter in European history. The fall was just the beginning. The real fight for survival was about to start. In Part 1, you watched 19-year-old Eugene Moran fall 4 miles inside a severed B-17 tail section. You watched him fire his machine guns at German fighters during the entire descent. You watched him crash through 80 feet of pine trees and survive with a crushed skull, broken arms, and shattered ribs. But surviving the fall was only the beginning. Because now Eugene Moran was lying in a German forest, drowning in his own blood, surrounded by enemy soldiers. He was 19 years old, 4,000 miles from home, and completely at the mercy of the same people he had been bombing hours earlier. Over the next 17 months, this Wisconsin farm boy would face horrors that made falling 4 miles look like a Sunday picnic. Interrogation, starvation, a prison camp that would become famous for the most daring escape attempt of the entire war. And finally, a 600-mile death march through the coldest winter in European history. 73 American prisoners would die on that march. Hundreds more would collapse from exhaustion, frostbite, and starvation. Eugene Moran would walk every single mile. And this is where his story gets even more impossible. German soldiers surrounded the crash site within minutes of impact. They approached with rifles raised, expecting to find a corpse. What they found instead was something that defied explanation. Eugene Moran was still breathing. His skull was crushed. Blood poured from a gash that exposed bone. Both forearms were snapped at unnatural angles. 6 ribs were broken, at least 2 of them puncturing his lungs. He was losing blood faster than his body could compensate. By every medical standard known to German military medicine, this American should have been dead before he hit the ground. The Wehrmacht soldiers lowered their weapons. This man was not a threat, he was barely alive. But before the Germans could load Eugene onto a stretcher, 2 men pushed through the crowd of soldiers. They wore tattered civilian clothing, not military uniforms. Their faces were gaunt, their bodies thin from years of malnutrition. They spoke rapidly in a language the German soldiers did not understand. These men were Serbian prisoners of war. Doctors. They had been captured years earlier and forced to work in German labor camps. When they saw the American tail section crash into the forest, they ran toward it, expecting to find a body they could bury with dignity. Instead, they found Eugene Moran, and they refused to let him die. The Serbian doctors had no equipment, no medicines, no bandages, no surgical tools, nothing but their training and their bare hands. But they had something else. They had seen too much death already. They had watched too many young men die in this war. And they were not going to watch another one slip away without a fight. One doctor held Eugene's head still, while the other assessed his injuries. Crushed skull with possible brain swelling. Both forearms fractured in multiple places. 6 broken ribs with probable lung puncture. Massive internal bleeding. Severe shock. The German soldiers watched as the Serbian doctors worked. One of them tore strips from his own shirt to bind Eugene's arms. The other applied pressure to the head wound, trying to stop the bleeding that was soaking into the forest floor. The Germans could have stopped them, could have pushed them aside and let the American die. But something held them back. Perhaps it was respect for medical professionals doing their duty. Perhaps it was simple human decency, surviving even in the middle of a war. Perhaps they simply wanted to see if this impossible survivor would continue to defy death. Whatever the reason, the German soldiers waited. And when the Serbian doctors insisted on accompanying Eugene to the hospital, the Germans agreed. They loaded him onto a stretcher and transported him to a military hospital in Bremen, the same city he had been bombing hours earlier. The German doctors at Bremen examined Eugene and shook their heads. His injuries were catastrophic. The crushed skull alone should have killed him. The internal bleeding should have finished what the skull fracture started. The broken ribs had punctured both lungs. His blood pressure was dropping. His pulse was weakening. They gave him hours to live. Maybe less. But the Serbian doctors refused to leave his side. They stayed with Eugene through the night, monitoring his breathing, checking his pulse, adjusting his position to ease the pressure on his damaged lungs. German medical staff, despite orders to prioritize their own wounded, provided what supplies they could spare. Bandages, morphine, blood plasma. 3 days passed. Eugene drifted in and out of consciousness. When he was awake, the pain was unbearable. When he was unconscious, he dreamed of falling. Always falling. The tail section spinning. The ground rushing up. The trees reaching for him like dark fingers. On the 4th day, his condition stabilized. The crushed skull was beginning to heal, though the pressure on his brain remained dangerous. His ribs were slowly mending. His forearms remained useless, but the bones were setting. Eugene Moran was going to live, and that meant the interrogations could begin. On the fifth day, German intelligence officers arrived at his bedside. They wanted information: bombing targets, formation tactics, radio frequencies, aircraft vulnerabilities. They wanted everything Eugene knew about the 8th Air Force and its operations over Germany. Eugene gave them nothing. Rank, name, serial number, that was all. The interrogators tried everything. They promised better medical treatment if he cooperated. They threatened to withhold food. They left him in isolation for days at a time. They woke him at random hours for questioning sessions designed to break his resistance. Eugene said nothing. 2 weeks of interrogation produced zero intelligence. The Germans finally gave up. This broken, barely alive American was either the most stubborn prisoner they had ever encountered, or he genuinely knew nothing worth extracting. On December 14, 1943, German guards loaded Eugene onto a truck with 14 other American prisoners. His arms were still in makeshift splints. His head wound had scabbed over, but infection was setting in. Every bump in the road sent agony through his broken ribs. 3 days later, the truck arrived at Stalag Luft 3. The camp held 10,000 Allied airmen behind barbed wire fences and guard towers. Wooden barracks stretched across frozen ground. Armed guards patrolled constantly. Searchlights swept the perimeter every night. Eugene was strip-searched at the gate. They took his dog tags, his wedding ring, the few personal items he still possessed. Then they assigned him to a barracks with 31 other prisoners and left him to survive. The conditions were brutal. 2 blankets per prisoner, a single coal stove that barely provided enough heat to keep the room above freezing. Temperatures dropped to 10 degrees below zero that winter. The cold seeped through wooden walls, through thin blankets, through bone. Food arrived twice daily. Morning ration was 1 slice of black bread and ersatz coffee made from burned barley. Evening ration was thin soup with occasional potato peelings floating in gray water. The Red Cross sent food parcels, but German guards confiscated most of them. Prisoners received 1 parcel per month instead of 1 per week. Eugene's arms began to heal incorrectly. Without proper medical care, without x-rays, without surgical intervention, the bones fused at wrong angles. His forearms remained twisted at 15 degrees. Simple tasks became impossible. Buttoning a shirt, tying boots, holding a spoon. Other prisoners helped him. They buttoned his clothes. They tied his boots. They fed him when his arms were too weak to lift a spoon. They shared their meager rations when he was too sick to eat. This was how men survived Stalag Luft 3. Not alone. Together. The camp had a secret. Prisoners had spent 18 months assembling a radio from smuggled parts. They hid it inside a false wall in Barracks 14. Every night, selected prisoners listened to BBC broadcasts and transcribed the news. By morning, the information had spread through the entire camp. January 1944. The radio reported Allied bombing raids intensifying over Germany. February. News of the bombing at Monte Cassino. March. Increased air attacks on Berlin. Each report meant more American bombers overhead. More crews shot down. More prisoners arriving at Stalag Luft 3. But the camp had another secret. One that would become legendary. For over a year, prisoners had been digging tunnels. 3 of them, codenamed Tom, Dick, and Harry. Tom was discovered and destroyed. Dick was abandoned, but Harry survived. 336 feet of tunnel running 30 feet below ground from Barracks 104 to the forest beyond the wire. On the night of March 24, 1944, 76 prisoners crawled through Harry and escaped into the German darkness. The escape lasted 1 night. German guards discovered the tunnel at dawn. They mobilized 70,000 troops, police, and Hitler Youth to search for the escapees. Within 2 weeks, they recaptured 73 prisoners. The Gestapo executed 50 of them. shot individually in different locations across Germany on Hitler's direct orders. Their names were posted on the camp bulletin board. The remaining prisoners fell silent when they read the list. 50 men, executed, for trying to escape. Security tightened immediately. Guards increased roll calls from twice daily to 5 times. They banned all prisoner movement after dark. They searched every barracks weekly. They confiscated tools, wire, anything that could be used for digging. Eugene watched it all from his bunk. His arms were slowly regaining function, but he could not work effectively, could not dig, could not build, could not help with any escape attempt. But other prisoners included him anyway. They shared food, they shared blankets, they shared stories about home. They treated him as one of their own, despite his limitations. Months passed. Summer came. The war continued. The secret radio reported D-Day on June 6, 1944. Allied forces landing in Normandy. Prisoners celebrated quietly. Guards watched nervously. By autumn, the Eastern Front was collapsing. Soviet forces pushed toward Germany. The radio confirmed it every night. Russian tanks were 300 miles away. Then 200. Then 100. On January 27, 1945, German guards ordered all prisoners to evacuate. The Soviets were 50 miles from the camp and closing fast. The death march began at 4 in the morning in the middle of a blizzard. 10,000 prisoners formed columns on the road outside Stalag Luft 3. Each man carried one blanket and whatever food he could scavenge. Guards distributed no additional rations. The temperature was 15 degrees below zero. Wind drove snow horizontally across the frozen landscape. German guards told them they were marching west away from the Soviet advance. They did not say how far. They did not say where they were going. They said anyone who fell behind would be shot. Eugene wrapped his single blanket around his shoulders. His arms still ached from injuries 14 months earlier. His ribs had healed, but cold air made breathing painful. His feet were already numb inside his worn boots. The column moved out at dawn. 10,000 men walking into a frozen hell. The first prisoner died on the second day. An American bombardier from Ohio collapsed in the snow. Guards dragged his body to the roadside and kept the column moving. By the third day, 4 more were dead. By the end of the first week, 23 bodies lay frozen along the road. The prisoners walked 12 hours each day. Guards allowed 10-minute breaks every 2 hours. At night, they herded prisoners into barns, churches, or open fields. The snow never stopped falling. Temperatures dropped to 20 below zero. Food became the only thought. Guards provided no rations. Prisoners ate snow for water. Some found frozen potatoes in abandoned fields. Others pulled bark from trees. A few traded personal items to German civilians for scraps of bread. Most starved. Eugene's feet blistered after the first week. The blisters burst and became infected. He could feel fluid squishing in his boots with every step. Other prisoners suffered worse. Frostbite blackened toes and fingers. Men lost parts of their feet but kept walking, because stopping meant death. The march continued through February. The column covered 20 miles some days, 10 miles on others. On bad days, when blizzards reduced visibility to nothing, they made 5 miles. Guards pushed them forward regardless. Prisoners tried to escape. Most failed. German guards shot 3 men who ran for the woods near Spremberg. They left the bodies where they fell as a warning. Other prisoners simply gave up. They sat down in the snow and refused to walk. Guards shot them too. 73 prisoners died during the first month. The survivors stopped counting after that. Eugene kept walking. His infected feet screamed with every step. His twisted arms ached constantly. His ribs throbbed in the cold. But he kept moving, one foot in front of the other, hour after hour, day after day, because he had not fallen 4 miles and survived German captivity just to die on a frozen road. By mid-February, the column had covered 200 miles. Soviet artillery rumbled in the distance behind them. American bombers flew overhead heading east. The guards became nervous. They knew the war was lost, but they followed their orders. Keep the prisoners moving. Do not let them fall into enemy hands. On March 15, 1945, after 47 days of walking, the column reached Bitterfeld. Guards herded prisoners into an old factory building. They said transportation would come soon. Eugene collapsed on the factory floor. His feet had swollen so badly his boots would not come off. His weight had dropped below 100 pounds. His ribs showed through his skin. His face was skeletal. 3 weeks passed. No transportation came. Guards brought no food. Prisoners survived on rats they caught in the building. They ate grass and weeds growing through cracks in the concrete. Dysentery spread through the factory. Men too weak to stand soiled themselves where they lay. The stench was overwhelming. German guards stayed outside. They brought no medicine, no bandages, nothing. On April 8th, the prisoners heard artillery, close artillery, American artillery. The sound came from the west, growing louder each day. Guards became agitated. Some disappeared during the night. By April 10th, small arms fire echoed through Bitterfeld. American infantry had entered the town, but Eugene Moran was barely alive. His body was shutting down. His pulse was weak. His feet were gangrenous. After everything he had survived, after falling 4 miles, after 17 months of captivity, after walking 600 miles through a German winter, he was dying on a factory floor, just miles from liberation. In Part 3, you will see whether American medics reached Eugene in time. You will see the desperate race to save prisoners who had survived everything the Germans could throw at them, only to face death at the moment of freedom. And you will learn what happened to Eugene Moran when he finally came home to Wisconsin. The war was ending, but his fight was just beginning. In Part 1, you watched Eugene Moran fall 4 miles inside a severed B-17 tail section while firing his machine guns at German fighters. In Part 2, you followed him through 17 months of captivity at Stalag Luft, 3 and a 600-mile death march through the coldest winter in European history. Now Eugene Moran was lying on a factory floor in Bitterfeld, Germany. His weight had dropped below 100 pounds. His feet were gangrenous. His body was shutting down. After surviving everything the war could throw at him, he was dying just miles from freedom. American artillery thundered in the distance. Salvation was coming. But for Eugene Moran, every hour brought him closer to death. On April 11, 1945, soldiers from the 104th Infantry Division kicked open the factory doors. What they found inside would haunt them for the rest of their lives, and what happened next would determine whether Eugene Moran's impossible survival story would end in tragedy or triumph. April 11, 1945, 2 p.m., Bitterfeld, Germany. The American soldiers stopped in the doorway. Several immediately backed outside to vomit. The smell hit them first, the overwhelming stench of human waste, rotting flesh, and death. Then they saw the bodies, hundreds of skeletal figures lying in their own filth across the factory floor. Some were not moving. Many would never move again. These were not soldiers anymore. They were skeletons wrapped in skin, hollow eyes staring at nothing, bones visible through paper-thin flesh. Men who had survived years of combat, months of captivity, and weeks of death, marched reduced to something barely human. A medic named Private First Class Robert Henderson entered first. He was 23 years old, from Cincinnati, Ohio. He had seen combat wounds. He had seen men die. But he had never seen anything like this. Henderson moved from prisoner to prisoner, checking pulses, assessing conditions. Most were unconscious. Many were dead. Those still alive were barely hanging on. When he reached Eugene Moran, Henderson shook his head. This one was gone. Had to be. His pulse was almost undetectable. His feet were black with necrosis. His breathing was shallow and irregular. His body temperature had dropped dangerously low, but Eugene Moran was still alive. Barely. Impossibly. Stubbornly alive. Henderson called for stretchers. The evacuation began immediately. American soldiers carried prisoners outside to waiting ambulances, working as fast as they could. Every minute counted. Every second meant the difference between life and death. Eugene drifted in and out of consciousness during the transport. He remembered seeing American flags. He remembered hearing English spoken without German accents. He remembered the feeling of being lifted, of movement, of warmth. He remembered crying. The field hospital was 15 miles west of Bitterfeld. Army doctors worked through the night treating freed prisoners. They had prepared for casualties. They had not prepared for this. 347 prisoners arrived from the Bitterfeld factory that night. 112 were in critical condition. 43 would die within the first 24 hours, despite every effort to save them. Eugene Moran was among the critical cases. The doctors cut away his boots. What they found underneath made even experienced surgeons pause. His feet were black. Gangrene had set in weeks ago. The infection had spread up both legs. His toes were already dead. The tissue was rotting on his bones. The senior surgeon, Captain William Morrison, made the assessment. Amputation, both feet, possibly both legs below the knee. It was the only way to stop the infection from spreading. But Morrison hesitated. Something about this patient made him want to try everything else first. Maybe it was the way Eugene kept fighting. Maybe it was the medical records that arrived with him detailing injuries that should have killed him months ago. Maybe Morrison just wanted to see if this impossible survivor could beat the odds one more time. They pumped Eugene full of sulfa drugs, penicillin, everything they had. They cleaned his wounds. They gave him plasma. They stabilized his condition hour by hour, watching for any sign that the antibiotics were working. For 3 days, Eugene Moran hovered between life and death. His fever spiked. His blood pressure crashed. Twice the medical staff thought they had lost him. Twice he came back. On the 4th day, the infection began to retreat. The antibiotics were working. The gangrene was not spreading. His feet were still badly damaged, but amputation might not be necessary after all. Captain Morrison had never seen anything like it. This patient had survived a 4-mile fall, survived a crushed skull, survived 17 months of captivity, survived a 600-mile death march. And now he was surviving gangrene that should have killed him within days. Eugene Moran simply refused to die. On April 13, 1945, 2 days after liberation, doctors transferred Eugene to a larger hospital in France. The facility had better equipment, more supplies, more specialists. If anyone could save his feet, they could. The transfer took 12 hours by ambulance and transport plane. Eugene slept through most of it, his body finally allowing itself to rest after 17 months of constant survival. The hospital in France became his home for the next 3 months. Recovery was slow, painful, frustrating. His feet healed gradually. The infection cleared completely by late April. The dead tissue sloughed off, revealing pink skin underneath. He would keep his feet. He would keep his legs. He would walk again. His weight climbed back. 100 pounds became 110. 110 became 120. The hospital staff fed him carefully, rebuilding his digestive system that had nearly shut down from starvation. His arms regained most of their function. The bones had healed incorrectly during captivity, leaving both forearms twisted at 15-degree angles. Surgery could have corrected the deformity, but Eugene refused. The surgery would have meant months more recovery. He wanted to go home. The psychological wounds were harder to treat. Eugene woke screaming most nights. The nightmares came without warning. Falling. Always falling. The tail section spinning. The ground rushing up. The trees reaching for him. Other nightmares were worse. The death march. The frozen bodies along the road. The sound of gunshots as guards executed prisoners who could not walk. The factory floor at Bitterfeld. The smell. The dying men all around him. Army psychiatrists diagnosed him with what they called combat fatigue. Today we would call it post-traumatic stress disorder. In 1945, they had no real treatment. They told Eugene the nightmares would fade with time. They were wrong. On July 3, 1945, doctors cleared Eugene for transport to the United States. He had been gone for 2 years and 9 months. He had flown 5 combat missions. He had fallen 4 miles inside a severed tail section. He had survived 17 months as a prisoner of war. He had walked 600 miles through a German winter. He was 21 years old. The hospital ship departed Le Havre on July 3rd. The crossing took 8 days. Eugene spent most of the voyage on deck watching the ocean, breathing free air, trying to remember what home felt like. On July 11th, 1945, the ship entered New York Harbor. Eugene stood on deck as the Statue of Liberty came into view. He was not alone. Hundreds of returning soldiers and former prisoners lined the rails watching the green copper figure grow larger as the ship approached. Someone started singing the national anthem. Others joined. Soon the entire deck was singing, voices cracking with emotion, tears streaming down faces that had seen too much death. Eugene could not stop crying. He did not try. The ship docked at Pier 90. Army personnel helped prisoners down the gangway. Crowds cheered from behind barriers. Bands played. Flags waved. Families searched the faces of returning men looking for sons and husbands and brothers they had not seen in years. Eugene had no family waiting. They did not know he was coming. Communications during the final months of the war had been impossible. His parents thought he might be dead. From New York, Eugene traveled by train to Camp Kilmer in New Jersey. Army doctors conducted full medical examinations on all returning prisoners. They documented every injury, every scar, every lasting effect of captivity. Eugene's medical report filled 11 pages. Crushed skull with multiple healed fractures. Both forearms improperly healed at 15-degree angles. 6 ribs showing old fracture lines. Chronic pain in lower back from spinal compression during the fall. Nerve damage in both feet from frostbite and gangrene. Malnutrition-induced organ damage affecting liver and kidneys. Post-traumatic stress with recurring nightmares and hypervigilance. The doctors recommended 3 months of additional treatment. Physical therapy for his arms. Psychiatric evaluation for his mental state. Continued monitoring of his organ function. Eugene refused everything. He wanted to go home. He wanted to see his family. He had not seen them since October 1942, nearly 3 years earlier. On July 25, 1945, the Army granted him 30 days leave. He took a bus to Wisconsin. The ride took 2 days. He slept most of the way, still recovering his strength. His family met him at the bus station in Soldiers Grove. His mother, his father, his siblings. They had received a telegram the day before. Eugene was alive. Eugene was coming home. His mother did not recognize him at first. The skeletal man climbing off the bus looked nothing like the son she remembered. Eugene had left Wisconsin weighing 165 pounds. He returned weighing 120. His face was gaunt. His eyes were haunted. His arms hung at strange angles. When she realized it was Eugene, she collapsed. His father caught her. His siblings stood frozen. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew how to welcome home a man who had returned from the dead. Eugene spent August at home. He slept in his old bed. He ate his mother's cooking. He walked the farm he had left 3 years earlier. Neighbors visited daily. They asked questions. What was it like over there? Were the Germans cruel? Did you kill anyone? How did you survive the fall? Eugene answered some questions. Others he could not. Some memories were too raw. The spinning tail section. The screaming wind. The bodies of his crewmates. The death march. The factory at Bitterfeld. Some things could not be explained to people who had not been there. The nightmares continued every night. Eugene woke screaming, drenched in sweat, reaching for guns that were not there. His family learned not to wake him suddenly. They learned to speak softly when approaching. They learned to give him space. On September 1, 1945, Eugene returned to active duty at Camp McCoy in Wisconsin. The war with Japan had ended 2 weeks earlier. The army was demobilizing rapidly. Millions of soldiers were being discharged. Eugene's discharge papers arrived on December 1st, 1945. Final rank, Staff Sergeant. Service dates, October 1942 to December 1945. Combat missions. 5. Status honorably discharged. His medals arrived separately. 2 Purple Hearts for wounds received in combat. The Air Medal with Oak Leaf Cluster for aerial achievement. The European Theater Medal for service in the European campaign. The Good Conduct Medal. The Prisoner of War Medal. No medal existed for falling 4 miles inside a severed tail section while shooting at enemy fighters. No medal existed for surviving what Eugene Moran had survived. Eugene returned to Soldiers Grove as a civilian. He was 22 years old with no college education and no job prospects. The farm needed help, so he worked there, planting, harvesting, tending livestock, the same work he had done before the war. But everything felt different now. The weight of tools in his twisted arms, the pain in his feet after long days standing, the nightmares that woke him every night, the sound of aircraft engines that made him freeze. Eugene Moran had survived the impossible. He had fallen 4 miles and lived. He had endured 17 months of captivity. He had walked 600 miles through a German winter. He had beaten gangrene, starvation, and death itself. But surviving the war was only half the battle. Now he had to survive the peace. In Part 4, you will see what happened to Eugene Moran in the decades after the war. You will learn how a broken, traumatized farm boy built a life despite injuries that would have destroyed most men. You will meet the woman who helped him heal. You will see the family he created against all odds. And you will discover how Eugene Moran's impossible story was almost lost to history and the remarkable effort to preserve it for future generations. The war was over, but Eugene Moran's legacy was just beginning. In Part 1, you watched Eugene Moran fall 4 miles inside a severed B-17 tail section while firing his machine guns at German fighters. In Part 2, you followed him through 17 months of captivity and a 600-mile death march through a German winter. In Part 3, you saw him liberated from a factory floor where he lay dying, weighing less than 100 pounds with gangrenous feet. Eugene Moran survived the impossible. He beat every odd. He defied every prediction. He refused to die when death seemed certain. But what happened to this Wisconsin farm boy after the war ended? What kind of life did he build with his twisted arms, his damaged feet, and his haunted mind? And how did a story this incredible almost disappear from history entirely? Because the final chapter of Eugene Moran's story contains a twist that nobody saw coming. A twist that proves sometimes the most remarkable thing a person can do is not survive the impossible, but live an ordinary life afterward. Eugene Moran returned to Soldiers Grove, Wisconsin as a 22-year-old civilian with no job, no education, and no clear future. His body was broken. His forearms remained twisted at 15-degree angles from bones that healed incorrectly in captivity. His feet ached constantly from nerve damage caused by frostbite and gangrene. His back throbbed from spinal compression during the 4-mile fall. His mind was worse. The nightmares came every night. Falling. Always falling. The tail section spinning, the ground rushing up. The frozen bodies along the death march route, the factory floor at Bitterfeld. The smell of dying men. Army psychiatrists had told him the nightmares would fade. They did not. Decades later, Eugene still woke screaming in the middle of the night. But Eugene Moran did not let his wounds define him. He could not do the things he once did. He could not grip tools properly with his twisted arms. He could not stand for long hours on his damaged feet. He could not forget the things he had seen. So he adapted. He found ways to work around his limitations. He learned to use his arms differently. He took breaks when his feet demanded rest. He kept the nightmares to himself, suffering in silence so his family would not worry. In 1947, 2 years after the war ended, Eugene met a woman named Helen at a church social in Soldiers Grove. She was kind, she was patient. She did not flinch when she saw his twisted arms. She did not ask questions about the war unless he wanted to talk. They married 6 months later. Over the next decade, Eugene and Helen had 9 children. 9. A farm boy who had fallen 4 miles and walked 600 more became the father of a small army. He worked construction jobs to support his growing family. The work was hard on his damaged body. Every swing of a hammer sent pain through his twisted forearms. Every day on his feet aggravated the nerve damage from frostbite. Eugene never complained. Not once. He simply went to work, came home, fed his children, and did it again the next day. His children grew up not knowing the full story of what their father had survived. Eugene did not talk about the war. He did not display his medals. He did not attend veterans' reunions. When his children asked about his twisted arms, he gave vague answers. When they noticed his nightmares, he changed the subject. Eugene Moran had survived the impossible. Now he wanted nothing more than an ordinary life. For decades, his story remained largely unknown. His crewmates were dead. The navigator who bailed out had moved to California and lost contact. The Serbian doctors who saved his life had disappeared into the chaos of post-war Europe. German records of the incident were scattered or destroyed. Eugene became just another veteran, one of millions who came home, built families, and tried to forget. But his story survived. In 2007, a local newspaper in Wisconsin ran a short article about Eugene. The headline read, "Local Veteran Survived Impossible Fall." A military historian named John Armbruster saw the article and could not believe what he was reading. A man fell 4 miles inside a severed tail section and survived, while shooting at enemy fighters. This could not be real. Armbruster drove to Wisconsin to interview Eugene. He was 83 years old by then. His wife Helen had died 3 years earlier. His 9 children visited regularly. His hands still bore the crooked angles from his broken forearms 64 years earlier. Armbruster spent 3 days recording Eugene's story. The mission briefing. The fighter attacks. The flak. The moment the tail section separated. The fall. The Serbian doctors. Stalag Luft 3. The death march. All of it. Eugene spoke slowly, carefully, remembering details he had not discussed in decades. He showed Armbruster his discharge papers, his medals, photographs from the war, a letter from the navigator who had bailed out sent in 1946 and never answered. For the first time in 60 years, Eugene Moran told his complete story. Armbruster began researching. He contacted the American Air Museum in Britain. They had records of Rikki Tikki Tavi, serial number 42-30359, assigned to the 339th Bomb Squadron, missing in action, November 29, 1943. Crew of 10, killed in action 8, prisoners of war 2. He found the missing aircrew report, number 1392. It listed the crew names, the mission details, the location where the bomber was last seen near Bremen. Armbruster traveled to Germany. He located the town of Syke, 12 miles south of Bremen. He interviewed elderly Germans who remembered November 1943. Several recalled seeing a tail section falling from the sky. One man, 6 years old at the time, had watched from a bomb shelter as it crashed into the forest. German researcher Ulf Koch had independently documented the crash. He had found the impact site in the woods. Pieces of aluminum skin still lay buried in the ground 70 years later. He had interviewed witnesses. He had mapped the debris field. Armbruster and Koch combined their research. The evidence was overwhelming. Eugene Moran's story was true. Every incredible detail could be verified. In 2018, 75 years after the crash, the town of Syke organized a commemoration ceremony. They erected a memorial plaque at the crash site listing the names of all 10 crew members. 6 of Eugene's 9 children traveled to Germany for the dedication. They stood in the forest where their father had landed. They saw the trees, the clearing, the spot where the tail section had finally stopped. German citizens who had witnessed the crash stood beside them. They shared memories. They expressed gratitude that Eugene had survived. The children met the grandson of one of the Serbian doctors who had saved their father's life. They visited the hospital in Bremen, where German doctors had treated him. They walked part of the road where the death march had passed. Eugene was not there. He had died 4 years earlier on March 23, 2014. He was 90 years old. He had lived 69 years after falling 4 miles inside a severed B-17 tail section. But his story finally received the recognition it deserved. Only 2 other documented cases exist of airmen surviving similar falls without parachutes. British tail gunner Nicholas Alcomade fell 18,000 feet in March 1944 and survived by landing in pine trees and snow. American ball turret gunner Alan McGee fell 22,000 feet in January 1943 and survived by crashing through a train station roof. All 3 men shared certain factors. They remained with wreckage that created drag. They hit objects that broke their fall. They were young and physically fit. And they were extraordinarily lucky. But Eugene Moran's case remains unique. He is the only person in recorded history to survive a fall of this magnitude while actively fighting back during the descent. He did not accept his fate. He did not give up. He kept shooting until the moment of impact. That spirit defined his entire life. When his bomber was destroyed, he fought back. When he fell without a parachute, he fought back. When interrogators demanded information, he fought back. When the death march tried to kill him, he fought back. When his damaged body made every day a struggle, he fought back. Eugene Moran never stopped fighting. In 2022, John Armbruster published his book about Eugene. He titled it, "Tailspin: The True Story of Eugene Moran." The book documented everything: the mission, the fall, the survival, the captivity, the death march, the long life that followed. The book included photographs Armbruster had collected over 15 years of research. Eugene as a young airman in 1943, the crew of Ricky Tikki Tavi standing beside their bomber, the impact site in the German forest, the memorial plaque in Psych, Eugene in his 80s, sitting in his Wisconsin home holding his Purple Hearts. Aviation experts analyzed how Eugene survived. The vertical stabilizer measured 13 feet tall. The horizontal stabilizers spanned 43 feet. Together, they created enough surface area to generate lift. The tail glided instead of plummeting. It descended at roughly 70 miles per hour instead of terminal velocity. The pine trees provided the final element: 80 feet of branches that absorbed energy and slowed the impact. Physics saved Eugene Moran. But physics alone does not explain why he kept fighting, why he kept shooting during the fall, why he survived captivity, why he walked 600 miles through a frozen wasteland, why he built a life despite injuries that would have broken most men. That was not physics. That was character. There is one final detail that most people do not know about Eugene Moran's story, a detail that was only discovered during Armbruster's research. The navigator who bailed out of Ricky Tikki Tavi before the tail section separated was named Lieutenant Robert Blackwell. He survived the war. He returned to America. He moved to California and tried to forget everything that happened on November 29, 1943. In 1946, Blackwell wrote a letter to Eugene. He had tracked down Eugene's address through Army records. The letter was short. It apologized for bailing out. It expressed guilt that Blackwell had survived while 8 of their crewmates died. It asked for forgiveness. Eugene never answered. For 60 years, that letter sat in a drawer in Eugene's Wisconsin home. He never threw it away. He never wrote back. He never spoke about it. When Armbruster asked Eugene about the letter during his 2007 interview, the 83-year-old man was silent for a long time. Then he said something that Armbruster never forgot. He did what he had to do. I did what I had to do. There's nothing to forgive. That was Eugene Moran. No bitterness. No blame. No anger at a man who had a parachute when Eugene did not. Just acceptance. Just grace. Just the quiet strength of a man who had survived the impossible and chosen not to let it poison his soul. From a farm boy in Wisconsin with a shredded parachute and a severed tail section, to a husband, a father of 9, and a symbol of human endurance. Eugene Moran fell 4 miles and refused to die. He walked 600 miles and refused to quit. He lived 90 years and never stopped fighting. The total number of people in recorded history who have survived falls of 20,000 feet or more without a parachute is 3. Eugene Moran is one of them, and he is the only one who spent his descent shooting back at the enemy. If you know a World War II story that deserves to be told, share it in the comments below. History is full of ordinary people who did extraordinary things. Their stories deserve to be remembered. Subscribe to hear more forgotten histories like this one. There are thousands of Eugene Morans out there. Men and women who survived the impossible and then quietly went home to live ordinary lives. Their stories are waiting to be discovered. Eugene Moran did not see himself as a hero. He saw himself as a farm boy who did what he had to do. But that is exactly what makes him a hero. Not the medals, not the statistics, not the impossible survival. The quiet courage to keep going when everything said he should stop. That is the legacy of Eugene Paul Moran, a man who fell 4 miles and never stopped fighting.